What our objective is we have heard different names or different terms in the context of Vedic knowledge system or in the context of loosely our scriptures, our religion, and so on. We are just trying to be a little bit organized about what those components are and how those relate to each other and how those kind of evolved a little bit, what they talk about. So that is a high level introductory kind of a session that we are conducting today. What happens is in our day to day life, if we come across certain questions, uh, let's say if you ask a person who is a Christian, you ask him, what is your religious book? He will say Bible. If you ask Islamic person, he will say it's Quran, and so on. Different religions have their own different texts, right, or different books. If you ask Sanatan Hindu, what is your reference book or religious book? Depending on who we ask, we can get different answers, right? Somebody might say it is Bhagavad Gita, somebody might say it is Puran, somebody might say different things, right? So there are different books. Now, does that mean that we don't have a single reference book or a single source that guides our religious principles? If we trace any of our scriptures back, they go back all the way to Vedic knowledge system or Veda. And that is some of the things that we are going to understand today. Lot of us have heard the word Veda, but we don't know what it is. Some of us know that there are 4 Veds, but beyond that, again, we don't know anything. And many of us think that, oh, it is anyway not for me, right? It is for the Pandit who comes to do some puja or some rituals. He knows, he chants something and he goes away. The word Veda does not mean religion, does not mean scripture, does not mean religious book. It doesn't mean any of those things. The word Veda comes from a root word called Vid. Vid means to know. Veda means knowledge.
Namaste to another episode of Indic Talks organized by Center for Indic Studies. Today we talk about an introduction to Vedic knowledge system, which is a book that enlightens us on the lines of the word Veda, but very few who understand the real meaning and the structure of the Vedas. In this talk, we will understand Vedas, the components of Vedas, key topics discussed in Vedas, and different branches. Today we have our speaker Parag Bhalerao ji, who will basically tell us about the same. It is a book that has been set to publish in about a week's time from when this talk is being conducted. He was born and raised in Pune, India, and he currently lives in the USA, working in the IT industry. He holds a master's degree in science and MBA in HR and marketing. Since childhood, Parag ji has been fascinated by spirituality. He is inspired by various writings of Dr. P.V. Vartak, and Parag ji took an initiative to explore scientific knowledge in various scriptures. Many of his talks are also available on our channel, and I would insist that our viewers, in order to understand the very basics of some very complicated texts or some texts which initiate a lot of complicated discourse, must first look at what he has to say about it so they can get a clearer view. And today, I think he's going to do the same with Vedic knowledge system. I welcome you, sir, and I request you to take over from here.
Namaste. Thank you for a wonderful introduction, Ojasviji. And it is very exciting to be here and talk to this wonderful audience about some of the concepts, some of the structure of Vedic knowledge system. Of course, as you can imagine, if somebody thinks that they will know everything about all the Veds or all the Vedic systems in 1 hour session, that's impractical. What our objective is, is we have heard different names or different terms in the context of Vedic knowledge system or in the context of loosely our scriptures, our religion, and so on. We are just trying to be a little bit organized about what those components are and how those relate to each other and how those kind of evolved a little bit, what they talk about. So that is a high level introductory kind of a session that we are conducting today. And as Ojasviji mentioned, there is a book that is coming up in next week or so, which dives a little bit deeper again into Vedic knowledge system from the structure and components perspective, right? Capturing the entire Vedic knowledge, I don't think anybody has been able to do it so far. So if I say that I'm trying to capture entire Vedic knowledge, it is way too much of a overstatement. So with that, we'll get started. What happens is in our day-to-day life, if we come across certain questions, uh, let's say if you ask a person who is a Christian, you ask him, what is your religious book? He will say Bible. If you ask Islamic person, he will say it's Quran, and so on. Different religions have their own different texts, right, or different books. If you ask Sanatan Hindu, what is your reference book or religious book? Depending on who we ask, we can get different answers, right? Somebody might say it is Bhagavad Gita, somebody might say it is Puran, somebody might say different things, right? So there are different books. Now, does that mean that we don't have a single reference book or a single source that guides our religious principles? So that is not the case. If we trace any of our scriptures back, they go back all the way to Vedic knowledge system or Veda. And that is some of the things that we are going to understand today. Lot of us have heard the word Veda, but we don't know what it is. Some of us know that there are 4 Veds, but beyond that, again, we don't know anything. And many of us think that, oh, it is anyway not for me, right? It is for the Pandit who comes to do some puja or some rituals. He knows, he chants something and he goes away. Beyond that, our introduction to Veds or contents of Veds is pretty much zero for most common people, not for very special people who take interest and study it a little further. But for most common people, it is just that something that a religious person, a guru or a pandit does. It's not something that I need to know. Well, the first important thing is that itself is a not best assumption or best way to look at it. Because the word Veda does not mean religion, does not mean scripture, does not mean religious book. It doesn't mean any of those things. The word Veda comes from a root word called Vid. Vid means to know. Veda means knowledge. So the books that we assume that are our religious books, so to say, are nothing but books of knowledge. And that knowledge is applicable to everybody. That knowledge is applicable to all of us, irrespective of our profession. Because Veds do address a lot of variety of knowledge, okay, including maths, including astronomy, including medicine, including engineering, including civil and construction and law, and we can just go on and on and on. So just saying that, oh, it has nothing to do with me is a incorrect assumption. Also, many times we don't take much interest in studying or understanding Vedic literature is because it is in Sanskrit. And many of us think that we don't know Sanskrit, or many of us don't know Sanskrit, right? But let that not be a bottleneck, let not that be a showstopper for us to explore or understand the knowledge. Because there are a lot of translations available, books available, which will help us navigate through this complex scripture. right? So with that a little bit of a background, I will just share my screen. We'll just go through a few slides and understand, as I said, some aspects of the structure of the Vedic knowledge system. And as we go along, if there are any questions, feel free to interrupt or put the questions in the chat box, and we'll do our best to get those questions answered. So as I was saying that there is a book that we will be using as a reference book for today's discussion. And that book is not out yet. It will be out in about a week's time, 10 days at the most. And the title of the book is Sacred Scrolls, Introduction to Vedic Knowledge System. I'll highly encourage that check out Amazon within a week or so and get hold of this book. It will help you understand a lot about our scriptures, our Vedic knowledge, what it provides, what information it has, so on and so forth. Now, few other questions that come about Vedic knowledge is who wrote this Veda? Okay, who are the authors? So as we probably know, there is no single author. There are a lot of Indian sages or seers from the ancient time who acquired this knowledge. And we'll say a little bit about what we mean by acquired and all those things. And later on, this acquired knowledge was grouped into 4 categories or 4 books or 4 collections, whichever way you want to call it. And that is the 4 Veda that we know today. And those are Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda, and Atharva Veda. Right? And we are going to understand a little bit about the construct and what these Vedas are, what they talk about, at a high introductory or cursory level. Now, who wrote this Veda? It is accepted that Veda are apaurushaya. Apaurushaya means not written by humans or not created by humans, right? So obviously, if those are not created by humans, where did they come from? Now, as I said, this knowledge of Veda is acquired by ancient sages, or we call them as seers or rishis or drashta rishis. We'll understand these terms in a minute. Now, how did they acquire this? So they proclaim that it is not my composition, it is not my knowledge. I just saw or I just heard those in the environment. Now, there are 2 ways to look at it. One is either they were in the deep meditative state, which we also know samadhi. So in samadhi state, they acquired this knowledge. They could see this. Or they had senses beyond what we have today to hear additional knowledge or additional sounds or additional voices in the environment, which that ability or that sense we have lost over the generations. Nobody has accurately stated when the Vedas were written, and different people use different different evidences, different techniques to estimate the time when the Vedas were written, and that goes typically more than 20,000 BCE. And again, some people have stated it way beyond that. Some people have stated that they are recent, maybe 1000 BCE. But again, if you look at most scientific analysis, typically maybe 25,000 BCE is kind of right, or the time frame that we can accept. The other thing is, Veda is not written by one person, or rather the entire Veda is not constructed. Written may be a little confusing word, and we'll see why. But the constructor composing the Veda is not done by one rishi. There is a set of rishis or different rishis who have contributed to different parts or different sections in the Veda. Also, there is a common misbelief that women are not allowed to recite Veda, or women are not allowed to understand or get the knowledge from Veda, which is absolutely wrong. Because lot of parts of Veda are written by female rishis or rishikas. So it is all the rishis who wrote the Veda or who constructed the Ved or who realized the Ved. They are not all men. There are women sages or women seers also. Now, when we look at the Ved, the individual verses within the Ved, they are called mantra. And there is a difference between mantra and shloka. Lot of modern texts, not modern, but any other religious text which is non-Vedic, the verses are called shloka, or there might be different names, but they are not called mantra. Mantra is used only to describe the verses in Veda. And there is a specific reason for that. Okay. When we talk about mantra, the mantra is supposed to be chanted in some specific way. You cannot sing a mantra with random tune. You cannot chant it in a random way. There are very specific ways in which these seers heard these mantras, and that is exactly the way we are supposed to recite those. Okay. It is not accepted practice to sing mantra in different tunes or chant in inappropriate intonation or inappropriate pronunciation. Okay. So the rishis who realize these different sections of Veda are called seers of that section, or drashta rishis for that respective section. Okay. Now, since these rishis say that we heard these mantras, we heard this Veda in the environment, these Veda are also called as Shruti Grantha, or Shruti means something that is heard. You must have heard that our overall knowledge is broadly categorized into two categories, Shruti and Smriti. Smriti is something that is remembered and recited or explained in analogies or fashion, whereas Shruti is what has heard. So all the Veda are known as Shruti, and all the other literature that was created or built by different seers, different rishis, that is called Smriti. So that is a clear distinction between Shruti and Smriti. Also, our Shastras accept that if there is a conflict between sayings in the Shruti and Smriti, right? Smriti is something that seers later on elaborated, explained, and so on. So if there is a contradiction or a conflict between what we hear in a Shruti versus Smriti, then Shruti is supposed to be taken as a pramana or the reference or a standard. Okay, so Shruti is the foundation, or Veda, Vedic structure is the foundation for everything that we accept today as our religion or our guiding principles for our religion. Okay. Now, a lot of us have heard of name of Maharshi Vyasa as a person who wrote Veda. If you look at literal sense of writing, then yes, Maharshi Vyasa did compose or did bind those Veda in literal format or in the text format, right? But he was not composer of those Veda. In fact, Vyasa was not his even original name. His name was Krishna Dvaipayan. And since he did extensive study across all the religious and Vedic scriptures, he got the name as Vyasa. And since he arranged those Veda in four books, got it written, preserved it, he is also respectfully called as Veda Vyasa. And later on, he wanted to make sure that this knowledge is preserved and populated, right? And for that, he took 4 of his disciples and taught each of them one Veda and asked them to preserve the knowledge and propagate the knowledge and maintain the heritage and teach that knowledge to people, right? Also, you will see, if we try to read the Veda and either original text or even a translated text, there are a lot of stories in Vedic literature. And many times those stories don't make sense to us. How can, for example, it says Indra killed Vritasura. Now, who is Indra and why did he kill Vritasura and what do I got to do with it? So it is important to understand or analyze these stories in the right context. These stories are there just to reveal some knowledge, very deep scientific knowledge in a easy to remember, easy to understand kind of a format. It should be or interpreted literally. If we like to, and literally in many cases, it sense or definitely we understand context a lot of sense, right? It's simple like for kids we tell stories and we say okay, tiger came there and tiger said such and such thing, and then the fox came and fox said. So we know that tigers don't speak human language, foxes don't speak human language, but we still preserve, maintain, and tell those stories because there is a message that we are trying to deliver through those stories. And similar thing is true for Vedic literature. You will find a lot of stories, but those stories are there to reveal or to pass on a message or give some message in story forms. Now, the other important thing comes is what is dharma? We say that our dharma is Sanatana dharma or Hindu dharma and so on. Then what is dharma? Interestingly, for our dharma, there is no guiding book which says you have to do it this way, right? There are books that prescribes certain things, that prescribe how you should behave and should not behave. In general, we should be genuine, we should do good deeds. And that alone or that itself is foundation of the dharma. Now, what is good deed? That is elaborated in different ways in different scriptures or different books. And what is good and what is bad can always be relative. What I think is good for me, you or somebody else might think, oh, that is bad. Or what you think might be good, I might think that is bad. So it can be relative based on the person or based on scenario or situation or context, right? But whatever is right in the context of supreme principles, not disturbing the nature, not harming anybody, so on and so forth, those kind of behaviors are called uh, religious principles, or that is the foundation of our dharma. Now, I mentioned that if there is a conflict between what is said in different scriptures, then always the Shruti Grantha or Veda are supposed to be Pramana or supposed to be the guiding principles. And we have to go by what is said in the Veda. One very important thing, and some of you will be surprised, that most of the deities, most of the gods that we worship today are not at all mentioned anywhere in Vedic literature. If you look at pure Vedic literature, for example, Krishna or Rama or Bhagwan Shankar or Ganapati or many of these deities are not mentioned in Vedas, at least in the way we interpret or we look at those gods or deities today. All the deities or gods discussed in Vedic literature are some form of nature, some powers, some energies, some energy sources, some phenomena, some aspects of nature are considered as deities. And then to explain their role and their importance, that message has come out through some stories. So those are all superpowers that are exhibited as a part of Brahman. Brahman is the supreme consciousness. We call it Brahman, we call it Paramatma, we call it Atman, so on and so forth. There are so many names we use for Brahman itself, but all those are powers or forms of Brahman. Those are worshipped in the form of deity. Okay. Now, again, beyond that, those are categorized and few different aspects or few different ways. The sources and forces of nature are called as deities, and those are Varuna, Surya, Vishnu, Usha, Agni, and so on and so forth. Then there are also some forces that control our emotions, and those are also treated as devatas, and some of those are Kamadeva, Mana, and so on. These are all emotions, right? We cannot show, "Oh, this is my mind," or nobody can point out, okay, in your body where your mind is located, right? So that is not a physical entity, it is more of emotions. And then you will see few other references to Yaksha and Kinnara and Gandharva and Apsara and so on and so forth, and we'll see what those mean. But at a high level, these are the three categories in which all the Vedic deities are categorized. Now, one of the things that you will easily understand, that we respect our gods. Now, all these gods or deities are form of nature. That means we respect our nature. That is one of the foundation or founding principle, that we need to respect our nature. That means we should not do things that will harm the nature. And if we really go by that principle, that guiding principle, that as our standard for living, imagine how much better Earth will be today, including all the pollutions, all the destructions of various natural resources, so on and so forth, right? Overconsumption of natural resources. All those things will be so much under control if we truly believe, truly accept that nature is the God, and we should treat that God with extreme respect. Right? But that was the intention, or that was the principle of Vedic literature. That is why all these are treated as deities. And of course, there are certain activities that are prescribed to satisfy or make these deities happy, so they can shower their blessings on us. Okay, again, it in some context it sounds religious, but it is very scientific and practical. We, in the introductory discussion, we talked about Veda means knowledge. Different types of knowledge is mentioned in the Vedic scriptures. Some of those are even popular today, right? You talk about Ayurveda, for example, right? You talk about different astronomy aspects today. You talk about some of the agricultural practices. You talk about some of the civil practices. Those are still in practice today, and those were established thousands of years ago, right? So it is very, very powerful, and also what we call it as a eternal knowledge, or something that has no beginning or end. That knowledge always existed, it does exist, and it will continue to exist. So it is for us to understand that knowledge and learn from it and take advantage and apply that knowledge. We talked a little bit about Shrutis and Smritis. Okay. Now, in the context of Veda, we have heard few terms. We have heard Sanhita. What is Sanhita? I know Veda, but what is Sanhita? And then I have also heard of Brahmanas. Now, people confuse between Brahmana as a text and Brahmana as a Varna, and we'll understand a little bit. Somewhere we might have heard of word Aranyaka. So what is this Aranyaka? And obviously, many of us have heard the word Upanishad. So what are these four things, and how do they talk to each other, or how they relate to each other, right? So let's just understand that a little bit. If I'll take example or take help of this tree diagram to help us understand. So foundation is Veda. We all know Veda. Now the Veda, as we briefly mentioned, are split or divided into four categories or four groups or four Veda. First is Rig Veda, next is Yajur Veda, then Sama Veda, and then Atharva Veda. Now, each Veda has something called Samhita. Samhita, if you do a literal translation, it means collection of mantra. So Samhita forms the original mantra that different seers heard or they realized. So those actual mantra are called Samhita. Those are the core foundation of respective Veda. Each Veda has Samhita. Now, some Veda have multiple Samhitas because once that Samhita was acquired and teachers started teaching to other disciples or other people, then different people form their own stream of thoughts or school of thoughts, and then they started teaching it in certain fashion. That because of that, those Samhitas had different sets of collections that different rishis started teaching, and those were named based on that rishi or the family of the rishis or heritage of those rishis and so on and so forth. So you might find multiple Samhitas for some of the Vedas. Now, Samhita forms the core piece, then comes Brahmana. And again, there are different ways people interpret whether Brahmana is first or Aranyak is first, but that is not important in this current context. Brahmana is Grantha, it is a text, it is a book, Brahmana book or Brahmana text. The Brahman text provides additional elaboration of different mantras, or for lack of better words, some kind of a commentary on certain Vedic mantras or certain sections in the Veda for everybody to easily understand it, interpret it, and apply it. Brahman Grantha also talks about some of the ritualistic aspects, the yajna and karma kanda and things of that nature. So it is a further commentary of original Samhita or original text, original Vedic text. Then comes Aranyaka. Aranyaka, as you can imagine, it has a word called Aranya. Aranya means jungle or a forest, right? So these are the texts which rishis took and contemplated, internalized, understood in a forest. Why in a forest? Because if we want to really study something, understand something, we have to get away from all the distractions. And back in those days, forests were the places where you can really go away and you will not have any distractions from rest of the community. So it is easy for us to focus, concentrate, internalize, interpret, and make additional sense out of the scripture that is written. So those are Aranyaka Grantha. And the last part is Upanishad. Upanishad also is called as Vedanta. Anta means end. So end of Vedas. Now end of Vedas does not mean Veda ends there, but the knowledge stream ends there. That is the last part of the knowledge stream in the Vedic scriptures or in the Vedic text. So Upanishad is typically, most Upanishads, not all, but most Upanishads are in the form of conversation. A teacher teaching certain principles to the disciples. So the disciples or Shishya will ask questions. In some cases, they will even challenge their teachers. And teachers always said, ask me questions. If I know the answer, I'll answer it. If I don't know, I'll try to find it out. So another aspect of our day-to-day religious practice is we never challenge our guru. Or challenge is fine. We don't want to challenge, I understand. But we don't even ask questions. Why do you do certain things? Oh, my parents did it. Why did they do it? Because their parents did it. Why did they do it? Because their parents did it. We never questioned. Or my guru told me to do certain things, so I'm doing it. We never question them. We never ask them, why are you asking me to do this? What is the purpose of this, meaning of this? It is not accepted practice in our society today to ask questions, which is very wrong. because in all the Upanishads, which are part of Vedic scripture or Vedic knowledge system, these are all texts where Shishya has asked questions and teachers have given them answers or explanations. You will also sometimes hear what is real part of Veda. Is Upanishad part of Veda? Is Aranyaka part of Veda? Because Veda is something that these seers heard. Now they only heard Sanhitas. Brahman and Aranyaka and Upanishads were constructed by these different sages. So is it really part of Shruti or Vedic text? And again, different people have different opinions about it. I'm just mentioning so you might hear it so you know what the context is. And people are free to interpret whichever way they want. But in most common practice, all these four aspects together form our Vedic literature. Further, if we look at the tree, I have tried to give the uh, specifics about different Sanhitas and different Aranyakas and Brahmans associated with different Veda. We are going to spend more time on this slide. It has all the components and details. So if we look at Rigveda, Rigveda has two Sanhitas. One is Shakal and another is Bashkal. And it has a Taittiriya Aranyaka. And if we go further, it has multiple Brahman Granthas, which is Aitariya, Kaushitaki, Sankhyayan. Also, you will see that there are so many references, so many texts which mention that there are a lot more Brahmins, lot more Upanishads, lot more Aranyakas. Over the period of time, we have lost a lot of those. It's very, very unfortunate, but we have lost tremendous amount of knowledge in the over the period of time, maybe during different invasions, different people destroying that knowledge and so on. But these are the texts that are available today. And people are still discovering some texts in some different fashion, and they get added. But these are what are available or commonly known today. So in Rigveda, there are three Brahmins, that is Aitareya, Kaushitaki, and Sankhya. And then Upanishads that are associated with Rigveda are Aitareya Upanishad, Bashkal Upanishad, and Kaushitaki Upanishad. Many cases, the ending part of Brahman is considered as Upanishad. So you might see at times the overlap between names. So ending part of Aitariya Brahman is Aitariya Upanishad. Ending part of Kaushitaki Brahman is Kaushitaki Upanishad, and so on and so forth. Then if we go to Yajurveda, Yajurveda is only Veda which is further divided into two parts, Krishna and Shukla. In literal translation, people say it is black and white. Krishna is black black Yajurveda, and Shukla is white Yajurveda. Well, if you just go with literal meanings, then yeah, you can look at it that way. But it's not really black and white. Those are two different streams, two different shakhas of Yajurveda. So again, if you look at Yajurveda, there is Taittiriya branch in Krishna Yajurveda, Maitrayani, Kathaka, and Kapishtaka. And then in Shukla, there is Madhyandin and Kanva. Now, interesting story, just to give you a little bit understanding. So if we look at this slide, we see that Maharshi Vyas passed on Yajurveda to Vaishampayan. So Vaishampayan was supposed to preserve, maintain, and propagate Yajurveda. Then why did it has two branches? The story goes that one of the disciples of further studies of Yajurveda of Vaishampayan was extremely bright, and he was the most favorite disciple of the teacher. Over the period of time, he had some conflicts. He did not agree with Vaishampayanji on certain principles, certain teachings, certain thoughts, whatever, right? And then there was a conflict or a fight between Guru and Shishya. And Vaishampayanji said, okay, you don't agree with me? Fine. Give me all my knowledge back and go away. Now, if I give you a physical object, you can give it back to me. If I give you knowledge, how will you give it back to me? Right? It's not a physical entity which you will give it back. So again, there are stories which says that the disciple then vomited all the teachings, and there were birds around called tittari birds. So those birds came and ate that vomiting, and they became knowledgeable. Now this sounds absurd. So in reality, what must have happened is Vaishnampayan told Yajnavalkya, okay, you give your knowledge back to me. All the knowledge that I gave you, Yajnavalkya, give it back to me. Give it back to me. How will you give it back? Okay, I'll call rest of my disciples. You teach everything back to them. And there was a rishi called Tittari Rishi, and he acquired most of the knowledge and took it forward. So anything that came from that Tittari Rishi is Taittiriya. It is called Taittiriya. Okay. Now, when Yajnavalkya learned everything from Vaishampayan, and then he taught it back, obviously there might be some part he might have missed, or he might have not taught in exactly same fashion, same sequence, and so on and so forth. So it is said that it lost its purity or its authenticity in some way. And that is why that part was called Krishna. Then Yajnavalkya went and he did Surya Upasana, and Surya Bhagavan was happy with his Upasana or his penance, and Surya Bhagavan taught the entire Yajurveda back to him. He came in the form of horse or a vajin and taught the entire Yajurveda to him again. So that part is called as Shukla Yajurveda, and the Sanhita is also called Vajasaneyi Sanhita, because Surya Bhagavan came in the form of vajin or a horse and revealed that knowledge. So it is called Vajasaneyi Sanhita. So that is why Yajurveda has two branches, Krishna and Shukla. Now, if we look at Krishna Yajurveda, then it again has its own Aranyaka, Upanishad, Brahman, and so on. So it has Taittiriya Aranyak and Maitrayani Aranyak. And associated with that, there is a Taittiriya Brahman. You must have heard this word if you are studying something or listening to some lectures. Taittiriya Brahman is one of the popular Brahmins. You must have heard of that name. Similarly, on the Upanishad side, there is Taittiriya Upanishad, Maitri Upanishad, Katha Upanishad, which is very, very popular or very, very wealth of knowledge. You might have heard a lot of lectures on Katha Upanishad. It is Katha Upanishad. When it says together, it says Katha Upanishad. Also Shvetashvatara Upanishad. So you must have heard these names, especially Katha Upanishad. Very, very nice, very profound Upanishad. If you have not heard anything around that, I would highly encourage that you buy some book or even go to YouTube and listen to some lectures related to Kathopanishad. Going on to Shukla Yajurveda. Shukla Yajurveda has its own Aranyaka called Brihadaranyaka on both the branches, Madhyandina and Kanva. And in Brahmana, it has Shatapatha Brahmana. Shatapatha Brahmana, again, within Brahmanas, that is one of the most popular or most well-known Brahman is Shatapatha Brahman. And there are Upanishads associated with Shukla Yajurveda. One of the most important ones is Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Ishavasya Upanishad. Both these Upanishads are again very popular. You will hear a lot of stories or a lot of talks. And if we really understand, there are so many practical aspects, applied aspects that we can learn from all the Upanishads. So Rigveda was the first set of mantras that was revealed. Then the Karma Kanda portion or the Yajna or worship oriented portion of that became prominent in Yajurveda. The next one is Samaveda, where a lot of these mantras were recited in the singing kind of a fashion. So that is Sa Ama, that is those richas, those mantras, those richas sung. That is what Sama really means, Sama Veda. So the richas or the mantras are sung in Sama Veda. So the origin of Indian classical music is traced down to, or traced back to Samaveda through one of the Upavedas. We'll see that. Okay. So in Samaveda, again, there are multiple Sanhitas, multiple Brahmans. Tandya Brahman is one of the very popular Brahman in Samaveda. Of course, it's kind of wrong way to say it is popular because different people have focused their studies. But you will hear Tandya Brahman little more than most of the other ones. And in Upanishad, Kena and Chandogya, again, beautiful Upanishads, uh, both associated with Samaveda. And the last one is Atharva Veda. Even in the sequence, Atharva Veda was the last one to be formed or established. Atharva Veda, you will see that there are a lot of aspects which are very common to common people's day-to-day life. And that's not the best way to say it, but a lot of aspects related to black magic are described in this Atharva Veda. Of course, those are not intended with the black magic, but that is how it later on got interpreted. So I'm using that word just to give you simple understanding. Okay. Now, Atharva Veda again has Shaunak and Pippala rishis. They had their own Sanhitas. So those are two primary Sanhitas. And Gopatha Brahman is associated with Atharva Veda. And there are lots and lots and lots of Upanishads associated with Atharva Veda. But again, the most common, the part of well-known or well-understood Upanishads is Prashna, Mundaka, and Mandukya. Again, beautiful Upanishads. If you have not read those, I would highly encourage. Many of us feel a little confused where to start the study. Upanishads is the best way. So we can go backwards. We can start with Upanishads, where the knowledge is explained and discussed in a question-answer, discussion-oriented format, and then go backwards to maybe learn some Brahmins and so on. So that might be the best path. So if we look at Veda, the word Veda itself, then this is what is covered in Veda. And then we'll understand a little bit about Upaveda and Vedanga. Yes, we have another 10-15 minutes. So this is the construct of Vedic text. And now some additional knowledge sprung out of this core Vedic knowledge with different intentions. And that is okay. That is called Upaveda and Vedanga. So Upa means sub, right? So subcategory or subsection of the knowledge is called Upaveda, or it is a supplementary scriptures. Now, these supplementary scriptures, what they basically did is they extracted practical or applied knowledge from Veda and documented or put it in a separate book. And that extracted knowledge, applied knowledge, they collected with specific aspect. And as you can see at the bottom section of the slide, we know the word Ayurveda. So Ayurveda is all the medical practice related aspects were extracted and documented in separate text called Ayurveda. Similarly, all the knowledge which is related to warfare, armory, weaponaries, so on and so forth, that is extracted primarily from Yajurveda and documented in Dhanurveda. Similarly, all the knowledge related to arts, including singing, dancing, music, different musical instruments, all those things, those were extracted primarily from Samaveda and documented as Gandharva Veda. And next is Sthapatya Veda or Shilpa Veda. There are a couple of other names, but that is mostly all the knowledge related to architecture, building the buildings. And interestingly, today when we say architecture, we understand how to construct a building or how to build a building, right? But Shilpa Veda or Sthapatya Veda, it does talk about how to build buildings, but it does not stop there. It has aspects related to entire town planning. Because if I'm building few buildings or few residential areas, how does that impact overall town? What all facilities we need to have? How will the town provide those facilities? All those aspects. So it is very, very comprehensive and not very narrow as today's different streams are. Okay, so that is some of the Upavedas. We'll quickly understand Vedanga, and we'll take a break from today's session. So Vedanga is, literal translation again is limbs of Veda, but it's not that physical limbs, but different additional aspects specifically describing certain things within Vedic literature are called Vedanga. And there are 6 Vedangas. They're Shiksha, Chanda, Vyakarana, Nirukta, Kalpa, and Jyotisha. So Shiksha is the aspect that deals with phonetics and pronunciations. Okay. It is very important to pronounce different words in specific way, especially when we talk about rituals or mantra. We also say that the mantras have different benefits, right? With mantra you can achieve this, achieve that. If you want that to happen, the mantra needs to be pronounced in very specific way, in correct way. Then only we can get those benefits. And again, it is not just a religious belief. It is a very scientific aspect. Even today, you might have heard of sound therapies and things of that, music therapies and things like that, whereby hearing certain sounds or certain type of music, certain medical conditions can be improved, right? And that is also part of our Vedic scripture or belief, Vedic belief, that if we chant mantras in proper way, the vibrations that are created has good benefits in the nature or on the human body, both. And that is why it is supposed to be chanted properly. If we don't chant it properly, it can have bad effects, right? If a doctor gives you wrong medicine, you will have bad effects. Same way it applies here. Then Chanda is more of something like meters. And you might have heard of some of the chandas. Gayatri Chanda is there, Trishtub, Anushtub. Anushtub is probably very common in most of the uh, religious texts. But there are so many other chandas which talk about how to construct a verse, how many letters should be there and what patterns and so on. The next is Vyakarana, nothing but grammar, right? So it talks about grammar of the language. Nirukta is more about etymology. So if we take a word, what is the origin of that word? How did that word come about? What does it refer to, and so on and so forth. So going into root or origin of certain word, that aspect is discussed in Nirukta. Kalpa talks about rituals, how to perform certain rituals and what benefits we can expect. So if you go to any puja, in the beginning there is a sankalpa, and in sankalpa there is a word kalpokta, kalpokta phala praptyartham. So whatever is mentioned in the kalpa, whatever is said in the kalpa to achieve that benefit is what the kalpokta phala praptyartham means. But basically kalpa elaborates more about ritualistic aspects and karma kanda aspects. And the last is Jyotisha. Jyotisha is not just about astrology, but it is also astronomy. Now, you will be surprised if you just study a little bit about Jyotisha or astronomy from Vedic context. So many phenomena, so many principles of astronomy are well documented thousands and thousands of years ago. In fact, one of the mechanism of doing the dating of Vedas or any other stories, many people use Jyotisha or astronomy as a reference. So in that story, somewhere somebody will say, oh, right now Surya is in such and such nakshatra. And at the same time, it is such and such Rutu. And at the same, so they will give some references which combination is possible only at certain time if you go back in the history. So that is one mechanism, or one of the mechanisms people use to establish dates for certain historic events, or including Veda or even Mahabharata, Ramayana, and so on and so forth. So it also says important aspect is timekeeping. So the calendar aspect also comes from Jyotisha. So at a high level, that is the overall construct or overall understanding of Vedic knowledge system that we wanted to cover today. I know we are running out of time. Quick mention, you will see two books here. The one book on the left, that is Creation of the Universe. It is scientific decoding of one of the very common or most popular sukta called Purusha Sukta. It describes how the universe was formed, and it decodes the Vedic mantra and relates to modern theories. And the second book, Sacred Scrolls, which is a further elaboration of the lecture we had today. It goes into a lot of details about every Veda, every Vedanga, every Upaveda, also something called Itihasa Grantha, Shruti, Smriti, and so on and so forth. In very, very simple form, just for any common person to establish that understanding of what our scriptures are. So with that intent, this second book is being released. It will be available in 8 to 10 days. So keep an eye on Amazon. You will find it there. Also, you can reach out to me if you have any questions. Email is the best way, or you can look at my website, my YouTube channels, and that way you can stay in touch with what's happening. That is all I wanted to cover for today. And Ojasviji, if we have any questions, we can answer those, or we can leave those for offline discussion.
Thank you, sir, for sharing with us Sacred Scrolls and the contents one can expect within it. It was an extremely interactive and helpful session. Interactive in terms of the wonderful diagrams that were actually helping out the slides, because there were so many things that you could just learn alone from there. There are several questions, and I think we can have another session where we just ask questions on the book, because there are several questions and several misconceptions that can actually be relieved in the next session to follow. Thank you very much for now, sir, and we wish to have many such talks with you. Namaste.
Namaste. Have a good day.